Hello and welcome. Recession, downturn, or simply a slump, irrespective of the language, no one can deny that the US economy has taken a turn for the worse. The question today is, will America drag the rest of the world down with it? Immediately after America launched the war in Iraq, the economy was booming, but recently uncertainty has replaced confidence. A common rule of thumb was that when the US economy sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Does that still ring true, or have other nations broken their dependency on the US economic engine? The value of the dollar has been plummeting against the other major currencies, and the shrinking appetite of American consumers could affect every country on earth. The former US Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan recently warned of the worst financial crisis since World War II. On today's show, we take an in-depth look at the state of the US economy and its global impact. And don't forget, we take your calls on this show. You can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining me today for our discussion are Ha-Joon Chung, one of the world's foremost economists specializing in developmental economic issues. Dr. Chung has served as a consultant to the World Bank and various United Nations agencies and authored the recently published book, Bad Samaritans, The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism. And from New York, I'm joined by Lakshman Achyutan, the managing director of the Economic Cycle Research Institute, an independent research body that monitors and studies economic sequences. In 2001, the ECRI correctly predicted that year's recession at a time when many on Wall Street still maintained a rosy outlook. Mr. Achyutan is also author of the book, Beating the Business Cycle, How to Predict and Profit from Turning Points in the Economy. And from Austin, Texas, I'm joined by progressive economist James Galbraith. He's a frequent contributor to publications on economic topics. He happens to be the son of renowned economist John Kenneth Galbraith and recently wrote the foreword to his father's new book, The New Industrial State. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. And I'm going to begin with an email that I got from Oregon from a viewer, Rob Timmons, who said, "Recession is considered a dangerous word. Elected leaders are the last to use it and hide behind economic statistics that contradict a pure definition. Can't economists agree on a more straightforward definition so that we can get past the excuses and get to work resolving the problems?" And I want to get a response from all of you, and starting with James Galbraith, if I may, please. The generally accepted definition of recession is 2 quarters of negative growth, but the word seems to mean different things to different people, as has been indicated by our viewer. So I just want to begin with you, James Galbraith, and then go to the others for your view on whether or not the USA actually is in recession, in your opinion, and based on what criteria?
Well, we're in a severe slump in the housing sector, which has ramifications through the rest of the economy. I suspect that this quarter we may see 0 to negative growth. Will we see a second quarter of negative growth? That I'm more skeptical about. I think that we will see accelerated government spending, the effect of the tax reductions that were enacted in January, the effect of the very rapid reduction in interest rates, the effect of the low dollar holding up U.S. exports. So count me in the still uncommitted group for that second quarter of negative growth.
Let's get Lakshman Achyutan, who's joining us from New York, to give us a perspective there. Are we in a recession in the USA? And do you think that, well, what do you base that criteria on?
Yes, I believe very recently, just last week, we concluded that we are in a recession. We're calling the recession here in the U.S. We certainly didn't rush to judgment, and this is our first recession call since early 2001. While the 2 negative quarters kind of rule of thumb is generally okay to use, it's neither a necessary nor a sufficient definition of recession. And we don't have to look very far. We could just look back at the last recession in 2001, and you will not find 2 negative quarters of GDP. It's a little more complicated than that. Basically, what a recession is a kind of a vicious downward spiral where you're watching essentially 4 indicators of coincident or just the economy outside your window activity reinforce each other on the downside. Specifically, sales falls, and then production comes down. You have weaker employment, and then weaker income, which then goes to the front of the line and pulls down sales. And that's why it gets out of control. It's a vicious cycle that gets out of control, and you can't do much about it once it starts. You can try to mitigate it and sow the seeds for the recovery. In our judgment, the contractions, the recessions that have been going on in the financial services sector and the construction sector have now spread to the broader economy, particularly non-financial services,
well, let's get a
where most of us work.
Well, thank you. Let's get a perspective from Dr. Hajun Chang, who's joining us from London. And sir, would you rate the US situation as a recession? And what would you base that judgment on?
Well, I think the two previous speakers are more of an expert on judging an economy to be in recession. But one point I want to make is that the impact of recessions felt differently by different people. And I think the reason why so many people are so anxious this time is that more people are exposed to the turmoils in the financial market. In the past, most people are not actually exposed to the financial market very much because they were just wage laborers. Today, everyone has a pension fund that is involved in the financial market, and this time housing the problems are raging. So I think this time around, whatever the aggregate number is, more people will feel exposed to this problem.
Right. Dr. Galbraith, I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January this year, and there was talk at that time of, was it a slowdown or a recession that was taking place? Now I've even heard people talk about recession versus depression. At what point do we start talking about depression?
Well, this is all questions of words. I wouldn't speak of depression until you've had a sustained downturn that's lasted for a year or more. And I think I'm perfectly willing to accept Lakshman's definition and his judgment on whether you will see something that will be called a recession as a result of events this quarter. My point is that forces are in place to mitigate that this year, but not to bring the U.S. economy back toward a full recovery and full employment in the foreseeable future. The housing slump, which has brought housing down to a very small part of what it used to be, and which will be reducing the share of American families that actually own their own homes into the foreseeable future, won't be cured this year or next year or the year after that, because the houses stay in inventory, they stay on the market, they act as a drag on everybody's property values, and that is going to be a sustained problem which will have to be dealt with by public policy, whether the economy as a whole stays in recession or not.
And Dr. Galbraith, how do you regard the propping up of so much of the economy by the U.S. government? We're seeing obviously the situation with Bear Stearns going on right now, major financial institutions such as that obviously being a fairly significant marker of where things are. And of course, we had everything from the airlines and major auto industries. The government seems to have to step in a lot.
It's entirely normal. Anybody who is under the impression that we live here in a free market economy simply has been reading too much Milton Friedman and not observing the real world. The actual condition of the U.S. is one of a deep relationship between the government and the major sectors, and that's obviously being shown particularly with respect to the financial sector, which can always count on government support when major institutions get into trouble. The difficulty with this particular episode is that obviously the Bear Stearns' buyer, J.P. Morgan, got a very sweet deal, which is now being reconsidered to a degree, and also that the federal government has taken no steps either to establish a more sustainable framework of regulation for the financial sector going forward, or to assist the homeowners, who are really the ones who are suffering, and many of whom were the victims in the first place of abusive mortgage practices, abusive lending practices that put them in situations that were bound to cause difficulties within a couple of years of signing those notes.
I want to get Lakshman Achyutan's perspective on this. Everyone talked about the subprime lending crisis, and I wonder to what extent do you feel that the lending of cheap money really was what brought, or largely responsible for bringing the U.S. economy to where it is now?
Well, I think Jamie was putting a very good perspective on this, in that there's the near-term issue, cyclical issue of a business cycle recession, which may play out over a few quarters. And then there are these bigger kind of excesses that we get ourselves into that may take a matter of a year or two or more to be worked out. And in the 1990-91 recession, there was a relationship there with a savings and loan bailout, a kind of a financial kind of structural thing where the government really had to get involved. And while the recession itself was well under a year, we had sluggish growth for a couple of years, so much so that former President Bill Clinton was able to really campaign hard on the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," even though we were in an anemic recovery. So the subprime issue and the housing downturn, that is at the epicenter of this business cycle recession. And as my other colleague was saying, that's part of the reason people are so anxious about this, because their home wealth, that household balance sheet is a big part of this story. But it strikes me that we could just look back over a few efforts by the Fed in particular to get us out of a mess that has sown the seeds of the next mess, as it were. If we look in 1998, you have the LTCM hedge fund crisis and the Russian debt default, and there was a lot of liquidity offered to the economy, which in part may have helped with the NASDAQ bubble that then burst, the IT bubble bursting. Right. In the wake of the 2001 recession and the early part of this current business cycle expansion that just ended, we had a deflation fear, which the prescription for that was very low interest rates, close to 1% for years. I mean, you left interest rates low for a couple of years, and that gave us, and certainly fueled, the home price increase. And now, again, we're getting strong pushes of liquidity to counter this downturn, the housing debacle, the recession, all of those things. Right. And we already see a bubble that is showing up in food and energy and these commodity prices.
Well, I want to ask Dr. Chang about currencies in a moment. I'm going to take a very short break here. Gentlemen, I ask you to stand by. Don't go away. We've got some more questions coming up after this short break.